Welcome to Psychology the Daf. We are in Gemara Pesachim, Daf Ayin Beis, and today we're going to talk about what I like to describe as the underdog principle. Specifically, we're going to talk about how the Gemara derives from Psukim the mitzvah of a man to give his wife sexual pleasure. And it's not so simple where the origin is. Our Gemara, toward the end of Amud Beis, describes a scenario where they're trying to find what other mitzvah, aside from being fruitful and multiply, may apply in marital relations. And it seems from the context of the Gemara that they take it as a given, chayav adam l'samech ishto b'dvar mitzvah, which literally translates as a man is obligated to please his wife during the mitzvah, in this case the mitzvah being the mitzvah of marital relations. But that's a little bit of a tautology because we don't know what the mitzvah is and who says it is a mitzvah. So what they really mean to say is the mitzvah would be a euphemism for sexual relations. They really mean a man is obligated to please his wife, period, meaning in the act of sexual relations. However, we really don't know what the source is of this mitzvah. Now, Nishmas Adam in Kuf Mem Zayin Sif Aleph seems to derive this from the pasuk in Shmos Chaf Aleph, chapter 21, verse 10, Va'onosa lo sigra. Over there it's describing somebody who takes a maidservant eventually for a wife, and it says that he may not deprive her of her sexual desires, meaning even though she originally was of a lower status, now that she's taken on as a regular wife, even if he were to take other wives, he is forbidden from depriving her of any particular status. And from there it means that if that's the way one must be careful with a maidservant who was taken as a wife and became a full wife, surely a regular wife. So that's the makor from the Nishmas Adam. The Sefer Mitzvahs Katan, Mitzvah Reish Pei Hey, Mitzvah 285, learns that this is based on a mitzvah saseh of V'simach es ishto. Now, there's a bit of a problem with that verse. That verse is in Devarim, and over there it's discussing a situation where a person who's about to go to war, and he doesn't have to go to war if he is a newlywed, and the verse says he should stay home and make his wife merry. V'simach es ishto. Now, the problem is, how does the Smak understand this mitzvah as coming from there when the Pashpashat in the Pasuk seems to be talking about a newlywed? It's saying if you're a newlywed, we learn Shana Rishona, there's a special mitzvah to be available for one's wife and not to deprive her of any type of company and friendship and love, let alone sexual. But the Sefer Mitzvahs Katan seems to be learning this is a source of sexual pleasure, the obligations of a husband to please his wife sexually at all times, even after the first year. Where does he get it from? Well, the first hint is that it does seem to be from the Gemara itself. The Gemara uses a lashon that's very similar. The Gemara says, Chaim Adam l'samech es ishto b'dvar mitzvah. L'samech es ishto is the same thing as v'simach es ishto. So it does sound like in some way, whether we like it or not, the Gemara held that pasuk was a makar. But that only is pushing the problem down one level more. We still need to know, how does the Gemara know that this pasuk is referring to a mitzvah beyond the first year? And to this, it's best to consider what I have started talking about, the underdog principle. What I mean by the underdog principle is that at times the Torah will state a mitzvah by the person or situation that requires the most reinforcement, even though it applies other ways as well. And I'll give you an example. The famous one is Rashi in Shmos chapter 22, verse 21, where it says, Kol almona v'yason lo sa'anun. You shall not treat poorly any widow or orphan. Rashi says over there, actually it's prohibition to treat anybody who is in some ways bound to be a victim, to treat anybody poorly and cause them affliction. But Rashi says that the Torah is talking about the usual case, who are the underdogs of society, who are the people that can easily be taken advantage of. That would be a widow and an orphan. But the Rashi saying, and it's based on the Chilta to Rabbi Shmuel, Rashi saying that the lav applies to anybody who is potentially a victim. Consider also that pasuk we quoted before by the maidservant is the source in the Torah for marital obligations between a husband and wife, as discussed in Gemara Ksubas, Daf Mem Zayin Amud Beis. Yet that pasuk is talking about a Jewish maid. But the answer is, again, because one might think if you take a person who originally was of lower status and then take them as a wife, beggars can't be choosy, right? So maybe you would have less obligations. The Torah is telling you, no, you must treat her the same as every wife. And even though the pasuk doesn't add that word, the same as every wife, we understand that it's the same as every wife. So once again, we have this underdog principle where the Torah will state something about a very specific scenario, about a scenario where a person or a situation requires much more reinforcement, and it applies in the general too. And another example is the fundamental prohibition of striking a fellow Jew. We are forbidden to hit a fellow Jew, but the source for that prohibition is from the oddest of places. The source is based on the pasuk in Devarim Chaf Hey Gimel 25:3, and also discussed in the Gemara in Sanhedrin on Pei Hey. The source is, it's telling the administrator of the lashes, the person who's the agent of the Jewish court, who is giving lashes to a Jew. It says, Arbaim Yakenu Lo Yosef. 40 you shall give him, actually 39, which we can't get into right now. You shall give him, and no more. So there's a prohibition to not get carried away, that if you need to punish the person, only give exactly what is determined to be appropriate for him, and not one drop more. That is the sole source in the Torah, the sole verse prohibiting one to hit a fellow Jew, even though the verse is talking about, ironically, a corporal punishment. So the upshot of all these sources shows that the Torah gives the example of the prohibition or the command from an extreme situation, but we are to derive that it surely applies to other situations. Given this concept, we may say that this is how the Smak understood through the Gemara that the verse V'simach es ishto was referring to all marital situations, because the verse was saying that even though you're in the first year of marriage and you have a big desire to go out to war, no, you must stay home and make merry with your wife. But what the Smak is saying through this underdog principle is really the Torah is saying that there's a given. It's a given that there's a special obligation upon a man to make merry with his wife, specifically sexually. And so the Torah didn't need to say that. The Torah only needed to reinforce it in a situation where the person might somehow or another feel like he has license to not follow this common sense idea.